a year to ask you that. Would you have been Secretary of State for Transport?
Well, Polly is saying don't answer that. What I said at the time was that what I would want to do is what Greens have done in Scotland and what Greens have done successfully in other places, including in the London Assembly, is to support on a case-by-case basis. Of course, I would want to do everything I could to support a rainbow coalition without necessarily being a complete member.
Ruth Lister.
I want to answer the question about participatory democracy, and I think I'm going to disagree with Polly because I don't think it's necessarily the same as the localism agenda. There is a radical participatory democratic agenda, which I think is what you're referring to. What I think is very important is we make sure that it's done in ways which don't exclude marginalised groups. And it can start, I think, with citizenship education. If we educate our school children to be participating in their schools, then they are better equipped to be full democratic citizens, but also it's about how we ensure that people in poverty, other marginalised groups are able to, that we lower the barriers against them being part of a participatory democracy. I don't want a participatory democracy which reinforces current lines of privilege. I don't know what the Greeks should do, but they've given us a real lesson in participatory democracy and what they're doing in their public squares, going back to the classical Athenian democracy in terms of how they are debating the terrible situation that the Greeks are in now. And I think it's a real lesson to us how they're doing that. I describe myself, well, I'm a child of the women's liberation movement of the 1970s. I called myself a socialist feminist in the 1970s. It's not a label we use very often now, but that's what I still think of myself as, and I suppose I'm a democratic socialist feminist, and for the reasons really that Kat gave this morning in her very good talk about the feminist agenda, and I'll leave it at that.
Chuka, is Ed Miliband getting rid of shadow cabinet elections so he can bring you in quicker?
I'm not going to answer that question because I don't think actually that, I mean, look, the reason that Ed has put forward this proposal is because, let me tell you, you know, we can talk about democracy and the rest of it, but let's talk about the practicality of it. What would happen is basically from around February next year, the whole of the PLP would have been distracted and focused on something else, which was each other and getting each other's votes, than winning out there in the country. And what I continually have many of my constituents tell me, who are not necessarily Labour Party members, but certainly supporters, is, you know, we don't hear enough from you guys. Why aren't you doing more to oppose what this government is doing? And I say we are, actually. Now, if you consider that at the moment, and I don't necessarily present this as an excuse, because I'm not saying we're a perfect opposition, but if you consider that at the moment we are being treated like the third party of British politics because you have two parties of government, and we are fighting very hard to get a hearing, I think we would completely compromise our ability to do that if we start becoming obsessed with each other and who's going to do what in the shadow cabinet election. I mean, there's been a lot of debate about how have the Conservatives managed to completely reframe the debate around the economy from one which should be focused on jobs to one that is obsessed with the deficit. I think it's commonly acknowledged that they managed to prosecute their arguments on that and gain some traction while we were occupied with the leadership contest. Now, that was our leader, so perhaps one can accept that, but I don't want us to be in the same situation next year when there would have been shadow cabinet elections, and that is a view that I think is shared across the party. So that, I mean, that's the...
Can I just guide you towards one question which hasn't been answered, very relevant to you as a London MP? The gentleman's question about England and Scotland and Labour.
I mean, we're going through this policy review process at the moment, and I'm quite open to us considering the idea of having an English Parliament. I mean, look, I mean, one of the things that is very clear to me, we need to bring back the coalition that, you know, a broad coalition similar to that brought us to power in '97. Now, we saw in the local elections in May quite a large proportion of centre-left Liberal Democrat voters come back to us, but we do need to win in the South. And by the way, the two are not mutually exclusive. There are 197 constituencies in the South. We've got 10 MPs. Unless we increase the number, we're not going to win. Can I just answer the question about the label issue?
Oh, yes.
Because, look, to my mind, I'm really less concerned by the label you attach to yourself or you attach to others, and I'm more concerned about what you actually say you believe in, the narrative and the story that you are seeking to win support for. And for me, that's where it starts. And the essential core of my politics, it's what got me involved in the Labour Party and Compass in the first place, is that I think that essentially we are mutually dependent beings and that we don't exist in isolation. And that, yes, we want to give people the platform to achieve the very best for their families, for themselves, but I actually think people aspire to more than that. They have aspirations for their community as well. And that is the core of what I believe in. Democratic socialist, social democrat, I'm happy with either. I prefer
socialist feminist?
I'm happy to be a feminist as well, why not?
Okay.
I mean, I prefer to call myself a social democrat, and I think I think we did a lot in 13 years in government, but the way I describe perhaps where we went wrong is that I think we were insufficiently social and insufficiently democratic, by which I mean in terms of putting our trust in the market and the state to some extent. I think we kind of undervalued some of those institutions that institutionalise, I suppose, the ties that bind and the sense of a common good, insufficiently democratic, because what we've ended up with, I mean, I think we accept the market, we accept the mixed market, but we need to democratise it. It's one of the reasons that I'm so in favour of, for example, remutualising Northern Rock. Okay. We need to democratise the market, and we're better to start in the financial sector.
Okay, just to move on, we're short of time and we've got these 4 areas we want to get through. I want to take 6 more questions on the good society and equality, which has been debated all day long in the previous session. Neil Lawson was making a very, very interesting point about the paradox that on the left you want to bring power down, but do you sacrifice equality along the way? There's issue about what we do about cuts. The Labour Party wants to halve the deficit over the course of Parliament. How does that affect equality and poverty? Go for it. 6 questions we'll take for this panel. Stick your hand up. Gentleman there with the beard and the green jumper.
I'm Christopher Owens. Our directly elected mayor is determined to get rid of dependency. And he's going to do it by bludgeoning people, by removing some of their council services, people who don't contribute to the society, in his view. Are very poor people really dependent? And if they are, what should we do about it?
Are very poor people, sorry, say that last line again, are very poor
dependent.
People? Dependent?
Yes, like on benefits and things.
Okay. Anyone? Well, since we're there, we'll go to you in a second, but just the woman in the green T-shirt there with her hand up. And then the gentleman here in the blue jacket.
Thank you. On the subject of the good society, we hear an awful lot about the good society utilising local enthusiasts, volunteers, and activists as well. But I'm a bit worried about some of these people who might be putting themselves forward for these roles. How do we know that they're going to be any good at it? I give you a case in point. The governors at my daughter's school have made a decision which they will not change to not allow girls to wear trousers to school. Now, this may seem a trivial issue. I think it's very fundamental. I'm so glad you're shaking your head. I'm at my wit's end about this as a group of us. But this is the kind of decision-making we're getting from these people who are volunteering and see themselves as the pillar of the local society. And how do we keep them out?
You've carefully disrupted my very careful 4-section plan, and that would have been great for the 4 seconds, but we'll take it now. Gentleman there in the blue jacket. Equality.
In the opening session, we had speakers urging the merits of direct action, feminist causes, things for the environment, etc. Neil Lawson followed and said that politics isn't working. He then said we, and he meant the Labour Party, I think, had paved the way for the Tories. When it comes to the next election, the voters will not, unless there's been one formed in the meantime, have a good society party to vote for. So who do we then vote for in these circumstances? Is it going to be the Labour Party or some amalgam of all these various interests that we've heard this morning who promise apple pie by the bucket load?
Okay, gentleman there in the blue T-shirt, 2 rows back.
Prashant Vazay, Camden Green Party. How do we get pay down in the boardroom and on the football pitch?
Good question. How do we get pay down in the boardroom and on the football pitch? Can we have a woman there at the end there, the yellow T-shirt, end of that row?
I was just wondering what you all think of positive discrimination in selection processes.
So positive discrimination
in general. In
general?
Yeah.
Okay. Across the board. Okay. And one last one. Gentleman there with the black shirt. We're going to take one more as well. One with black shirt and the woman here, who I missed.
Do you think that the Liberal Democrats' acceptance of the changes, which they seem to be doing, really destroys all the basic democracy of the NHS?
Okay, and the lady here in the front row. Hold on, there's a mic coming your way. 1 second.
You mentioned climate change.
That's the next theme, so do you want to come in there? We're not talking about that yet.
What?
Because it's equality time.
It's equality time. You will be the first question of the next bank. We will come to you first next. Let's just deal with equality of the questions we've got. You don't have to answer all of the questions. Let me just tell the panelists, let's keep to time because we're running out of time already. I'm going to kick off with John Harris because he wrote a book called Who Do We Vote For Now?
Oh, it's called
So
now Who Do We Vote For? But it was the same idea.
Gentlemen, good. Is there a good society party? Are Neil Lawson and you in charge of it?
I'm not in charge of anything. Just want to make that clear. Well, there's two ways of answering that question. Under the crappy, busted, broken electoral system that we've got, you have to do things like I had to do at the last election. I live in a Liberal, Democrat, Tory marginal, and the Tory candidate, who was within a few hundred votes of winning, was Annunziata Rees-Mogg. So I had a great big, they call them lozenges, I had a great big Liberal Democrat diamond in my garden, and I went out helping them canvass, and I was their sort of secret weapon. I'll get thrown out of the Labour Party for saying this. I was their sort of secret weapon, because we'd meet Labour voters and they'd say, I'm voting Labour, and I'd say, well, don't do that, you'll end up with Annunziata Rees-Mogg as your MP, and David Heath, my MP, won, and he's now the Deputy Leader of the House, and that hurts. And I won't do it again. He also assures me, we've got this in a Guardian film he made, that Britain will be a much more equal and fair society in 5 years' time. I don't think he means a word of it. So that's one answer. You just have to, our electoral system makes monkeys of us all. You just have to make this awful calculation about who is, you know, some people are 500 miles from your values and some people are 499 miles, and you have to vote for the person who's 499 miles from your values. Which is why, to hark back to that seminar we had before, we have to carry on pushing for an electoral system, a change on the electoral system, and not an awful, not even a compromise, a miserable solution to any of this like the alternative vote. Looking ahead 20, 30, 40 years, because it'll take that long, we need the single transferable vote in multi-member constituencies.
Okay, I'm just going to...
and then on to...
Very quickly.
Okay, very quickly. On this question of statism and sort of guaranteed norms and weird people getting involved who are running schools and so on, I think this is a real danger. I'm more localist than Polly sounded like she was sort of by instinct, but I think one of the areas where we have to watch this very, very carefully is making the case for state education and local education authorities. I think that's massively important. I think that there are a few institutions that are less fashionable in Britain than local education authorities, but they're there for a reason. And I think when Michael Gove's finished with things, we're going to miss them. And I think that's very, very important. Last question. How do you get paid down in the boardroom and on the football pitch? On the football pitch, I have no idea. I'm nostalgic for the days when teams would source their players locally and Swansea City would go from Division 4 to Division 1 in consecutive seasons. And the idea that Arsenal, Chelsea and Manchester United just locked everything down between them wasn't there. I don't know about that. In the boardroom, there are creative ideas afoot. One very good idea is you build pay ratios into the tax system. So if your pay ratios come in at, say, 25-1, you pay slightly less corporation tax. Never forget, really, this is part of the way that good capitalism should work. John Pierpont Morgan, who founded JP Morgan, who now pay their executives huge amounts of money, thought the only decent, satisfactory, well-motivated way for JP Morgan to work would be one in which pay ratios never exceeded 25-1, and I think that's a pretty good yardstick.
Just continuing on that theme, so Polly, let's bring you in here on that boardroom pay. What would you do to bring down pay in the boardroom and on the football pitch?
Don't know much about the football pitch, and I think it's less of a problem because if people can see, all right, maybe outrageous sums of money that pop stars or footballers get, but at least you can see what they do every Saturday. You can see them kicking the ball around and they either get goals or they don't. You can discuss whether or not they're worth the money. The people in the boardrooms, there is no conceivable way you know what they do, and you know very well that if they fell under a bus, somebody else would take over and things would go on exactly the same. There is nothing special about them. They are ordinary employees.